tuatahi o te tauhau, te kaupapa o te Environment Committee. Me karaki a tātou, ti mātou tātou hui. E te atua tō mātou kaianga, whakapoinga o mātou katoa me te kaupapa o tēnei hui. Oro haina o mātou hingi ngaro o mātou nākau, hei mahi ki ngā mahi pai, mo te whānau, mo te hāpuri, mo te hapu, mo te iwi nui tona. A kona mai o mātou kia humārere te titiro, kia tū mai ngā wā e taumaha ana, kia puta mai e taumata kia tau titiro. Ho mai te kaha, a kia tūtaki pai o mātou mahi katoa, e noi nei I runga I te ingoa o tō mātou kaiwhakaora a hiko aiti. Āmene. Kia ora kaitou.
Thank you. All right, let's begin. Are there any notices? I see none. Is there any notices or apologies? Are there apologies from Councillors Hewitt?
I've received none.
Okay, noted. Any other? Okay. Any conflict of interest declarations? Those. All right.
Yes.
Let's go to the confirmation.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, conflicts of interest. Just noticed that I have an interest in one of the items in regard to the Ahuriri estuary and contracts for that through. I'll identify it later on.
Okay.
Well, what does that mean?
Is it one that is causing you to recuse yourself from the discussion?
I'm not recused, I'm just identifying it as a potential conflict.
Excellent. Okay. My kind of man. Confirmation of the minutes.
Oh, that's the best joke we've had for a long time, Chair.
I thought I had mine there somewhere.
And appropriate.
Here we go. We're considering the minutes now, please. For accuracy, any comments on any of these pages?
Chair,
Councillor Bailey.
the Ahuriri Estuary Stormwater and Wastewater report on page 3, the motion, was that in the Environment Services Committee or was it in full council where we extended that a wee bit, something around asking the Chief Executive to write a letter to Napier City Council, or am I reading something wrong?
I think, Chair, it flowed through from the committee's deliberations to the subsequent council meeting.
Okay, yep.
Move, Chair. Second. Move.
I'm sorry.
Move.
You're moving the...
Second.
Okay. Are there any matters arising from these minutes?
Isn't that follow-ups?
I hear none. So do we have to take any further action on them? So we've received one? So what does it say? Is it coming or not coming? So I've just been told that Councillor Dick is not coming today, so we need to move to accept his apology on that matter. Councillor, thank you. And Councillor Bailey, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We did approve the minutes, correct?
Yep.
Yes, we did.
All right. So, follow-ons from previous meetings on page
5.
yep, just a handful of those. Any staff comments on any of these? Or we just take this as read?
Yeah, so number 1 obviously is in the agenda today.
Indeed. Okay. Number 2,
Also on the agenda.
also on the agenda.
forestry slash management, we still need to come back to the committee on that. So that's that is in progress. There has been discussions with the team on that, and number 4 has been actioned.
Okay.
Chair.
Wow. Councillor Graham.
Through you, James, on that slash issue, did the government, I can't recall whether the government in their policy had reference to it, or did they have...
So the National Environmental Standard on Plantation Forestry that came into effect in May last year has a whole series of rules aimed at slash management. There was a programmed review 12 months after the NES went live, and so that's something the Ministry for Primary Industries is looking at this year, which is how's the first 12 months gone. The events in Tolaga Bay resulted in the Minister asking for additional advice from the Ministerial Advisory Group on Forestry that I sit on about whether or not there's more that could be done in terms of both rules and policies, but also research and other such things, and that work's underway at the moment. We've procured some independent advice that will get reported through to the Minister. So it's a bit of a work in progress. There are rules. The question is whether they're adequate. Those rules are currently being enforced by our compliance team.
So, supplementary, was anyone prosecuted with a disaster on the East Coast?
Yeah, I understand that there are 11 prosecutions that have been taken in Tolaga Bay. So just about every forestry operation in that catchment has in some way breached their resource consent requirements or regional rules up there. So there's a big program of enforcement up there.
But we're on to it, because it's a continuing disaster.
We are onto it, but there are genuine practical challenges. So I take every opportunity to just caution that it's not an issue that we can simply solve. And every time there's a major rainfall event, we're going to get more.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question around the NES. Can you tell me what the distance plant back from gullies are? And look, you don't have to answer it now. I'd just be interested to know what the real rule was, because my understanding it's only 5 metres. That seems crazy.
Yes, so I think the answer is it's 5 metres from a certain height, which is determined by, I think, a 1 in 20 year, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone at the back of the room, flood event. So theoretically, you do a modelling exercise to work out how wide a river would be, and then you've got a setback from that point, how wide a river would be during a certain flood event. But the practicalities in any given rural location of having that modelled, having that understood, etc. Although in the harvest management plans, which they're required to submit to us under the rules, those things should be mapped out in terms of a risk map of the harvest plan.
How many pages would a harvest management plan be?
Reasonably substantial documents, certainly the ones that I've seen. Yeah. I don't know whether, Malcolm, you want to add anything on that?
Just as you have. Yeah, they're reasonable sized documents. They're covering the whole operation, most of which is permitted. So we're just sort of seeing what they're proposing to do, but not really in a major position to consent or anything. The setbacks do depend on the river, where it flows. So ephemeral rivers don't need setbacks. Flowing rivers over 3 metres need a setback, and the wider rivers, I think, can be up to 10 metre planting setback.
Councillor Barker.
Yes, I want to come back to forestry slash management and say that note that I've had some informal discussions with people in Kiwi Rail by accident one day, and they were expressing particular concern about this with the potential reopening of the Wairua line. I sort of put on the record that we're proposing to have a seminar, and the Chief Executive indicated it'd be a wise thing to invite Kiwi Rail and other transport agencies to it. So we've got a broad front on this so that we're very clear about it. And all to tell the forestry companies that their deep concerns about slash coming down, blocking culverts, wiping out railway lines, roads and other things. So we have to have a very firm line on this issue, and I concur with everything that Councillor Graham says as well.
Okay, noted. Any other Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just further question on the forestry space management. James, I note that you've had a management meeting around the conference to be held, hosting a conference to be held on forestry issues, but you didn't mention when you expect to come and make reach a decision as to when that's going to proceed.
So, to be honest, this was a task that was given to Liz Lambert to drive, and with her illness, and she's still recovering from her surgery and is probably not back on deck for about another week or week and a half. It's kind of stalled right now until she comes back. So when she comes back, we'll give a full update on the plan for the year.
It would be nice to have some idea as to when it's actually going to happen, because there is a sense of urgency, I think you may have picked up on.
Yeah, certainly there's a sense of concern around forest slash management. Our plan was to hold a forestry event in conjunction with the completion of the Right Tree, Right Place project and the planned special consultation with the community around this council investing substantially in commercial forestry. So those items are covered in some depth on today's agenda. So you'll see that there's quite a lot of work we need to do before I think we're in a position to have a broad and deep conversation with the community about the future of forestry in Hawke's Bay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to agenda, the second item, follow-up item, because I'm a little confused as to whether the requests we've made for information on wastewater discharge for both Napier City, Hastings, and more recently Whirinaki, Penpack. I had assumed, I think from our June meeting, that we were going to get an update on the state of those discharges, and it remains murky as to where it sits, and I don't know whether there is an intent to include those consents and discharge and compliance issues as a part of the Coastal Marine project, or where does it sit, and what have you done about it, Mr. Chair, in terms of reporting back to your committee?
Chair, if I
That was a goodie at the end. You saved that, didn't you?
perhaps I can help here.
I like the Chair's
I
answer.
referred to the Chief Executive on the issue.
Oh, inside pass.
So following the discussions in the middle of last year, we undertook to get both Hastings District Council and Napier City Council to come and present to the committee in relation to what they're doing with their stormwater assets and their future plans for upgrades, etc. So those presentations have occurred. We were not aware that there was an outstanding action in relation to those, but in relation to the marine environment and any monitoring that might go on, that's something we could provide some further information on, as there are monitoring exercises being undertaken in relation to PAMPAC's outfall as well as the municipal outfalls as well. So if that's of interest to the committee, it is something we can come back to.
I think the minutes that we just approved did identify that there had been some discussion about the potential of differing interpretations of the science involved in all of this, because we were presented with some theories that didn't strike some of us as sound at the time. So there was some reference in something I read preparing for this, I think that's where it was, that there has been also some meetings with regard to that there's some initial meetings with science folks. I'm not sure what the outcome of that is.
Perhaps we could raise it in the later item today under hotspot.
So I could probably answer that now if you want to, Chair. So in essence, that the item 2 in the follow-ups is exactly that aspect or element of the discussion. So I've had an initial meeting with John Kingsford just to try to reset the kind of relationship between ourselves and Napier City in terms of collaboration in the space, and we're bringing together science, regulation, policy staff for a fairly detailed workshop in March to bring together our programs of work so that we avoid the risk of competing science and different views on what we know about the estuary. So we're trying to bring together a stock take and then a way forward for collaboration. It doesn't specifically address Councillor Keaton's questions around the state of any particular individual consent, but it is very much about agreement on what we know, what we see the issues are, what work needs to be done to fill gaps, how we can collaborate and partner in the work we're doing to move this forward.
I'd also note that in the last few days, I think all councillors were sent a submission that Napier Forest and Bird made to the Napier City Council with respect to Araruri in particular. That was the main emphasis of that. And if you haven't read that, I'd urge you to. They're certainly, from their standpoint, trying to step up the urgency of all of this. And I, for one, am happy to see them do that. Would someone like to move accepting these follow-ups?
I'll move.
Thank you, Councillor. And second, Councillor Graham, all in favor?
Aye.
Call for minor items. Councillor Graham.
Tamata Park and David Jack's land.
Okay. Councillor Bailey.
Communication 3 Penpack and Plan Change 6 Fast Fail.
Plan Change 6.
Fast Fail.
Okay. Any others? You have Penpack, right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so we have 3 for later on. Okay, item 6, Central Hawke's Bay Wastewater Discharge. You will see you've been given a update from the staff down there. And Malcolm, I guess you're going to give us a little bit. And let me, before you begin, the staff has dictated that this meeting ended at 12:30. So I am therefore going to be ruthless in terms of assuming materials have been read, and there's not going to be a lot of time to discuss this stuff, folks. So,
although, Chair, there is the option to
cancel the council meeting?
No, and the issue is that meeting did need to be publicly notified, so we could adjourn the meeting if the business is not concluded, and we could reconvene after the council's extraordinary meeting.
So relieved.
If that's the will of the committee.
And without Councillor Dick here, we might actually be able to do that.
Look, before Malcolm starts, can I just note that I have placed on the table a memorandum that was received last night from Central Hawke's Bay District Council, and it simply provides additional information and context to the paper that was provided on this item today.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So this is a brief report just to let you know of the process that is underway and reinforced by this extra material that's come from Central Hawke's Bay yesterday. So that they have convened a working group following up from the prosecution which occurred with their not being able to comply with their resource consent for Waipawa, but they're looking at their Waipawa, Waipakarau and Otani wastewater discharges and looking at a range of options to better manage that going forward. And those options that are basically in front of this working group, discharge to water through to complete discharge to land. All options are open. They're looking in discussion with this working group about what's preferred and in time what's affordable. I think this note from Central Hawke's Bay gives a little bit more detail on the timing of what they're doing. They have a responsibility to report back in June to the Environment Court in terms of the prosecution, so they're basically timing their reporting to that date. Representation is reasonably wide, but there has been, just note in here, they have sought more membership from tangata whenua representatives and have struggled to get that support. So they're still looking to get people onto this working group, even though it's progressing anyway. So that's perhaps all I need to say.
Questions?
I've got a question. Could someone explain to me the first sentence is memorandum under funding? It says funding the project has been identified as a significant risk and activity that requires strategic thinking and development to allow the solution to progress once approved.
I think the risk is that the financial resources currently within Central Hawke's Bay District Council's long-term plan are inadequate to fund the solution, and therefore there will be a need to go back to the ratepayer by way of an amendment to their long-term plan, which will inevitably involve rates increases. And so I have not heard from the Central Hawke's Bay District Council any resiling from that fact. I think they just see that that is a risk of sorts.
Of sorts. I thought it's a problem rather than a risk.
It's an interesting choice of language.
So the working group is being told not to consider the costs at this stage, that they're open to all options, but in time they're going to turn around and have to actually put a cost on options that are put forward, and that'll lead you back to can the community afford it, and is it willing to afford it?
Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Are you our HBRC representative on that?
I am. Wayne Wright is also there, or Wayne hasn't attended them all, but Wayne's on that committee, and Tanya Dyack is also attending. She's there more because if this leads to resource consent changes, she'll be the officer who picks that up.
Okay, so I have to say I'm slightly concerned that this group's now met 4 times, and it seems to be very much in the start-up phase of what they're doing. Are you, and this might be an unfair question, Malcolm, is your sense that they will meet the deadline that's been set here, which is June this year?
I think they will. I think they're basically driving it to achieve that deadline. They will be reporting. There'll be a question of how fast they then work to actually make change.
Implementation.
Yeah.
Can just along those lines, who is actually driving the process? Who is the individual?
Who's the chair?
That I could say at the next Environment Committee meeting, I want you to come up here and tell us why this is taking 12 years.
It's convened by the Central Hawke's Bay.
But no, the deputy mayor is on there, so that's probably
Who's the chair?
That's probably the senior ranking individual.
I can't actually answer that. It's sort of been convened. These meetings have basically been led by the consultants. So the consultants who are reporting to Central Hawke's Bay, and the officer Darren de Klerk has basically been leading the project. So it's been more at an officer level and supported by the technical experts that have been running the meetings.
Did you have?
Not really a question.
Hold your comment.
Need a chair.
Question?
Malcolm, can you tell me what they don't know? What are they trying to find out? Surely we've had 12 years of this. They'd know something by now.
Well, they probably know. They probably know the failings of the system. They know that they've invested quite a lot, sort of without full knowledge of the benefits of those add-ons. So I think they realise that there's been some poor sort of decisions made along the way to try and fix a problem without looking at the overall operation. So they've stepped back to sort of say, let's look afresh at the whole nature of the waste stream, the waste disposal process, the end point of discharge, and let's look afresh at what we want from a community point of view, which is what's being asked of this group, and what the technology is to achieve that. So they're getting to a point of being reasonably well informed of the processes they've had, the options that are available to them, preferences of the community, and cost is, I think, the one where they're going to have to start spending a bit more time as they narrow down on options. The last meeting we had was on the 5th of February, and they asked they put up a range of options, and they asked the group which they preferred, and basically they fell in the middle. So they just dismissed the options of direct discharge into freshwater, and they dismissed the extreme option of total land-based managed discharge. And they're looking at the options in between and taking those away to look further at what that means in terms of treatment processes, costs, etc. So that's where they sit at the moment.
I think one of the new pieces in this is this consideration of a single solution for Otani as well as Waipawa and Waipukaro. So combining them all, piping the waste streams of all three into one sort of mega plant is the new piece in all of this. Whereas previously these have been considered as individual solutions, and I guess as the costs of certainly Waipawa and Waipukaro have grown, consideration of a single silver bullet, if you like, is now on the table.
I'll move.
Any other questions? Would you like to comment?
I certainly do. Do you have a seconder?
Seconder? Well, I think that the motion is to receive the report. Yeah. Is there a seconder?
Yeah.
Mr. Bailey?
Yep. So thanks very much. It's the second time I've had to, and you've had to deal with this. I guess my comment is that, firstly, we need a chair from the community. We need someone who can come to us and report from the community. This is a very good group of people. We have a new mayor, and we have a chance to sort this thing out once and for all, because it is a legacy of incompetent governance from this community, and we're all sick of it. So thank God it's changed. Thank God we're into a new era, because we need to be into a new era. I have faith that this group will sort this out, but they need to be able to report back to us, because, of course, we don't have a good history of cooperation with this region on this issue. And it has all changed, and we're all giving it time but it needs to be resolved.
Councillor Bailey, you have a comment to make?
As always, Chair, I'm just really pleased to see that there are some planned key milestone dates in there, so that we can hold this group to account if milestones aren't reached, because we've we've just got to get onto it. So, and I get that, in the sense that that's how they feel about it as well, and they want to resolve the issue. So, I'm pleased to put that down there.
Any other comments? Okay.
I'd just like to add, I'm very pleased that the chair is in his usual optimistic mood and encouraging about this.
Let's be clear, you're referring to that chair.
The chair of the regional council, yes, that's right. But I have to put it on the record that I am not so. I'm not interested in Central Hawke's Bay coming here to tell us what problems they've got about this, risks, whatever. What we have to have here is a sewage system that works. I don't care what happens in between. It's got to work. The years and years and the decades of sewage flowing into the Tukituki River has to stop. End of story. And that's the community's issue, and it has to solve it. I also want to put on the note on the record that this regional council has fined the Central Hawke's Bay Council in the past for breaches. I was personally harangued by the then mayor about it, who was outraged. I was completely outraged that they'd ever been in that situation. I went and looked at the sewage system they had at the time, and have to say I was appalled at what I saw. This is decades of neglect and ignore, and they have cried poverty all the way through, and that's where we've got to this. Well, in my view, it's got to stop. The community has to take responsibility for cleaning up its own messes, not leaving it to others. Full stop. That's it. And we expect to see them come to here with a plan that works. And I'd also note that this regional council put out the hand to help in buying land at this council's expense, which they just simply pushed away and went and did something else. So I have less time for this, for helping in the case of Central Hawke's Bay than what we would have had otherwise. So I just expect them to come up with something that works. That's it. I'm not interested in all the angsting and the agony that goes in before that. They've just got to tidy up, and the Tukituki River has to be looked after. End of story. Fix it.
Councillor Hewitt, this is your turf. Do you have anything to say?
We're on a septic tank system.
Pardon? Very good.
Well, let me close. I'm going to pile on here. My first political engagement in Hawke's Bay was in 2006, when a group of outraged people around the lower Tukituki called a meeting that was held at the Havelock North Community Center. The hall was filled. The regional council was obliged to come and make a presentation on the state of affairs. Then Chairman McIntyre told the group that was assembled that it would take 10 years to sort out these issues, and that we just had to be patient about it. That was not greeted with a great deal of positivity. He was subsequently replaced as chair, but he was wrong. But he was wrong for the wrong reason. The people at the meeting thought that this should be happening quicker, but he was wrong because it actually is going to take 20 years, not 10 years or 12 years, to get this. We're going to get a report on June 19th. 12 years after that meeting, as has been pointed out here, still farting around, trying to figure out what to do with this issue. This is gross negligence, as far as I'm concerned, on the part of the elected officials of Central Hawke's Bay over that entire period of time, some of whom have had the chutzpah to run as environmental candidates since then. And so I think this is just an awful blot on our management collectively of the environment and of a highly significant piece of our environment. There's been a lot of mention in this document about consulting with Maori and so forth. Where have they been for the last 12 years on this issue? Where? I haven't seen any sign of pressure on elected officials, either around this table or in Central Hawke's Bay, from that community on this issue. None. So our chairman is optimistic. I have high regard for the current mayor. My high regard for her is matched only by my low regard for her predecessors, and it's time to get on with it. And if we need to babysit this project more aggressively, Mr. Chief Executive, then that's what we need to do. But it seems like there's a lot of drift in this calendar, 17, community reference group meetings, for God's sake, at this point. I'm exaggerating, it's only 7. But it will be 17 by the time we get to the end of this process here. So this has been a disaster, and it still sits there as a blot, and we need to do something about this. I don't know what else we can do other than wait it out, but I'd like to hear some recommendations from the staff on at some point as to what we can do to speed this up. Any other comments before we vote on this?
Yeah, I was at the same meeting, 206, and also spoke to the chairman of the Tai Whenua last week, and he said that the marae chairs were invited to the meeting and none came. Well, people have got to realise that Maori chairs don't sort of sit in reservations like Indians waiting for the white man to call. His remark to me 2 days ago was, just get on with it. So I concur with your remarks.
Chair, I realise you're in debate. Just to be helpful, can I just remind the committee that we are, both Central Hawke's Bay and ourselves, operating under instruction from the Environment Court So taking any further enforcement action in relation to the ongoing breaches at the moment is not a viable pathway because the Environment Court has given Central Hawke's Bay until the 30th of June to produce this report. So we're on a track and a timeline right now that the court has determined, and our hands are somewhat tied until that time.
We're forbidden to move quicker?
Well, look, Central Hawke's Bay could certainly expedite this project and could submit their report to the Environment Court sooner. We don't have any legal leverage to require that to be the case. So the representations and advocacy by councillors today is probably the strongest tool that we have at this point in time.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, a brief comment, not so much in defence of Central Hawke's Bay, but to point out that they are in the unfortunate invidious position of having their wastewater in full public view and easily observable. Before we throw too much mud and other things around, we should reflect on the fact that our own municipal systems in Napier and Hastings and Wairoa are similarly neglected. They reflect a disastrous situation. At the moment, we only have small windows of observation on them, and the advantage we have is we can't see them, and that's a very fortunate situation for us that we can't see them, because the disaster they represent, should we be able to see them, and I'm looking forward to the reports that will come to this table shortly, which will demonstrate the disaster that the region faces in terms of its wastewater. And the emphasis, I would suggest, is on this council to do its job to ensure those consents and that compliance is adhered to. And to date, we have been woeful in ensuring that these important systems in our region are attended to. Central Hawke's Bay is the tip of the iceberg, and as sooner we get the full detail on this, then we'll start to make the progress that you admirably advocate for.
I'm happy to endorse that comment, but my personal focus at the moment is on the Tuki. That's my constituency, and I'd like to be notified of every one of these meetings. I will attend every one of these meetings and be a pain in the ass if I need to be. All those in favor of accepting the report? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Next item, management of public use of River Berm lands update.
Yeah, so David's just coming down the front to present the paper, so I just want to introduce David. This is David Carruth. He's our new manager, regional projects, obviously replacing Gary.
Assets.
Pardon?
Regional assets.
What did I say?
Regional projects.
Oh, sorry, regional assets. So look, David's a civil engineer, also has a master's in hydrology, and has been working with Regional Council from 2015. And prior to that, spent at least 10 years in the UK working basically for the multinational engineering consultancies on global projects. So he's a great asset for us here at Hawke's Bay, and a fresh breath of air and a lot of new thinking. So I really just want to introduce David, and he'll crack on the main points of the public use of rivers paper.
So, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris, for the introduction. Today, really, councillors, is about, I guess, giving you a progress update and talking a little bit about what's next on this particular project. So in terms of progress, we've really been in a research and trialling phase. Widespread trials on the Narururu, including hay baling and planting the natives, and importantly, retirement of land between Fernhill Bridge and the river mouth of the Narururu. That's the right bank. And also grazing ceasing on the lower Tuki from Blackbridge down. So, I think that's certainly good progress in the grazing area. In terms of other items for public use of rivers, there's been progress and a memorandum of understanding drafted for Central Hawke's Bay and the pathway there. So I guess in terms of progress, it's really been research, really, and trialling of initiatives that our previous open spaces manager came up with. In terms of what's next, really moving from a research and trialling phase to seeing opportunities and public consultation. So the next 3 to 6 months will really be about engaging the community and iwi. And we've identified representatives as part of that consultation process. And that, we've actually progressed with the permanent ranger staff position as well. So that's progress and what's next, really.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Isn't the issue simply livestock on the berms, and in a perfect world we'd spend $2 million a year and kick all the cattle out, keep livestock out of the waterway and get on with a beautifully maintained corridor for to handle floodwaters, which is what it's set up for. I don't see any prices in here. We have in the past, to be fair, but I think this is, you're telling us what's happening today and fair cop, but the reality is we want cattle out of there, it's going to cost a couple of $1 million a year, and that's a decision the council's got to make. I can't see, can you explain the consultation part of it to me?
So I can jump in there, Fenton. Part of this is trialling some different technologies to understand some of those costs. So I think when we actually bring forward a plan to execute a lot of this work, it'll be fully costed with the impact on operations and maintenance. And it is true that where we currently, in fact, receive revenue from grazing rights, small amounts of revenue from farmers for that, will actually be, mowing some of those berms or investing in planting and maintenance of those plants. So it is true that alternatives will very much likely cost more than our current status quo, and we need to bring that forward most likely through the LTP process to understand the full funding implications and the full rating implications of those changes.
Supplementary to that, Chair, in the when the sawfly erupted before my time, I think Councillor Curtin might have been around, and Councillor Dick probably, but there was a program set up. I think they borrowed $9 million and it's been paid off over a certain amount of time. There was talk about continuing that rate, or that specific rate, to lift the berms from 100-year to 500-year protection. Is there a possibility that this could be incorporated into that solution?
Yeah, so the current setup, you're right, is that that loan repayment has been carried on to fund the level of service change. And the level of service change at a high level puts aside 10% of the value of that project for projects around our regional parks and berms.
So the solution sits there?
There's some money that sits there. I guess the confidence that is the right amount of money we need to do some more work on.
Okay.
And probably July we'll start in earnest to have a proper understanding of that level of service project and the full cost. At the moment, it's in the books at 20 million, and my view is that's probably way insufficient.
Councillor Bailey and Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. You've given us a list of progress updates, that's things that have happened. I don't get a sense from that whether you feel that they've succeeded or not. Can you just very briefly, whether the tests or the trials that you've done, whether you feel that they've achieved the outcomes that you were looking for?
Sure. Hay baling's certainly been a success. I've talked to the team about that, and that has been there's been uptake with the hay baling. So I think that's certainly a success. The fact that we've retired areas of Narua and Tuki, I guess that would exhibit success for me. Native planting, I think, has been, I think it'd be fair to say, hit and miss with the planting, but it was a trial. So the feedback I get from the team is that that has largely been successful. So, yeah. In terms of outcomes from the trials, I think that's the main things to report, really.
Okay. Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you. David, congratulations on your promotion. I've enjoyed working with you in the past, so I look forward to seeing you a bit more. One of the discussions we had last year was around there's a lack of ownership of the Hawke's Bay rivers because mostly there aren't even signs saying, you know, this you're crossing the Tuki or you're crossing the Narora or whatever the river that you're actually crossing. There are just bridge names. And the feedback in terms of other regions is if you have if you're actually displaying the name of the river, then you get increased public ownership and, I don't know, positive feedback to keep it clean or look after it. So Gary Clode was quite a fan of this idea, and so was Mary Ann Baker. And instead of sort of getting too carried away, and you know, he was just going to get on and start getting some signs up, some river signs where he could. So I'm wondering, has that happened, and can it still be in the scheme of things with what you're talking about here?
I think we keep it in our thinking.
So it is in. One of the things we have done is worked up a standard for our signage and also an understanding we have destination locations and then other locations where we don't want to attract necessarily the public into the river areas. So that's part of the plan going forward. And I guess our approach is to have a planned approach where we're aware of all the costs up front and then can build those into the LTP. So I guess in terms of ad hoc signage, that's something we're not pursuing at the moment. We do have a signage standard, and where we are at, we have a lot of draft plans for the river corridors, but before we launch into executing any of that work, we do need to do that public consultation, and particularly the iwi consultation, to make sure that the work done to date actually aligns with the aspirations of the community. And I think until we do that, you know, we really need to wait and then also understand our full signage stock take, so we have a consistent approach across the whole of the region.
It's different to what we were told, so what you're saying is nothing's happening and there will be another talk fest.
I don't think I said that. I said we had a structured approach where we understand the cost implications of our endeavours, prioritise the work and make sure that the work is aligned with the community. At the moment, the river plans have not been through a comprehensive public consultation. So I've held that back on the basis that it would be probably foolish to start executing work, particularly without that iwi consultation having occurred.
Can that work in, James, with Alan's Transport Committee discussion?
I think the Transport Committee is another group that needs to provide some input into the process.
Well, they thought it was a great idea too, so I'm asking what's happening.
Yep.
Councillor Graham.
Well, of course, the problem is immense, isn't it? And you guys can do as much as you can, but it is immense. And if you take stock out and you get weeds and wherever we put a park in, it seems to control the hooning activity, which we get on the Narora, you know, and especially around Twyford. And it's really dangerous activity. I get lots of phone calls from the Twyford residents that people are going down there with four-wheel drives and motorbikes, huge speeds. And they're a dangerous bunch too. And I know Viv doesn't like to approach them, and fair enough too. And the locals don't want to approach them. So they smash our gates and they smash up everything that on their four-wheel drives run over. I'm just wondering whether we don't have to have rangers, whether we don't have to have at least one ranger that neighbours can ring and say, you know, this is occurring at the moment, because they're quite overt. They're not hiding.
So on that, Rex, there is positive action. I think back in July of last year, there was agreement in principle to pursue a ranger position from this council on the basis it goes through the annual plan process. We're currently in that annual plan process and have put up a ranger for funding. The latest review is that it was looking promising in our ability to afford that, but obviously it still needs to go through the rest of that annual plan process and the decisions of council. So that ranger is in there, and I'm confident that we'll be able to get that through. We've also invested additional money in security patrols, so we are over budget on some of those security patrol issues, and we do work with the police. So Vince and that are in constant contact with the police as well. It is a massive problem. It basically costs us a lot of money to pick up rubbish, put back gates, and it just seems like senseless acts of vandalism. And I think what we're learning is as we improve, particularly the destination areas, that will drive some of that behaviour out as they become more popular and they're a nicer place to be in.
Chairman?
Councillor Barker.
I'd just like to take a slightly different tact. I know it's sometimes easy to forget that we were once young people.
Hooning. I did do it.
Exactly my point. He's confessed now.
Still doing it.
You know, that young people, particularly young men, are going to want to push things to the limit. It wasn't a long time ago the people of Rome petitioned the Senate complaining about young men riding the horses at speed through the markets. This has happened since the dawn of time. I don't think it'll change it. What I think we should be looking for is, rather than just have a random area where people go and get this thing out of the system, can we have some sort of semi-organised place or process?
That's exactly
and
right.
say, you know, right, if you want to ride your motorbike out, whatever it is, and leap over things, well, here's your place. Just make sure you're tidied up there. And same with four-wheel drives. Get a place where people can get it out of their system and go and do it in some sort of semi-organised, I won't say controlled way, but semi-organised way. And we know what we're doing. The young people in Hastings used to go quite often get cars which were no good for anything. They called them river wrecks. They'd go to the Narora, they'd pull the bonnet off, tie a rope to the back of the car, and they would surf on it. This is their means of having fun. They want. It's like the young guys in Christchurch stealing cars to go at high speed. They do this for a buzz or excitement. You're not going to take that out of them quick, so you've just got to find a way of trying to deflect it.
So certainly that is the approach. In the draft material, there is designated four-wheel drive type areas. We've just got to go through the rest of the process to make sure that that's generally acceptable to the users of the river, and also from an environmental perspective, that we're not encouraging that behaviour when we have nesting birds and other sensitive beach areas.
Point number 3 in the document refers to a number of documents that have been prepared. Is the plan to consolidate that into some sort of public consultation document? And when will that be ready and on the street, so to speak?
Yeah, so look, at a high level, certainly the Narororo development plan and the Turaikuri concept plan, we need to go through, do the community consultation for that. So that's through iwi engagement. So that's targeted rather than a public process. Then the view is that the output of that and the funding requirements will go into the next LTP process.
So the whole process will be wrapped into the budget process and concluded by...
I think that's the most sensible approach, yeah.
Someone like to move the receiving report?
I can move that, Chair.
Councillor Bailey, Councillor Bevan, second right. Any other discussion? All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? Accepted. All right, thank you. And we're on to Clive River dredging. Same team?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So, yeah.
It's been decided? It's been decided by some royal theatre speech. I don't know why we're debating this.
By Tangy Day, you can take liberties.
Go for it.
So really just update on the process, which is currently underway for gaining a consent. Obviously, this isn't for flood protection, the dredged work, so a consent is required. The first step in that process really is the design phase. To complete that, you really need to be obtaining information on the channel as it is today. And then drafting tender documents to then be passed on further down the track. yeah, I guess there's two steps further, after that, which are to engage a consent planner to assist us with that consenting process. And critical to the dredging operation really is early contractor involvement. So making sure we talk with contractors early to make sure risk is managed, the environment is safeguarded, and we're thinking about all the things we need to think about early on. We're not getting to appointment of a contractor and there aren't consideration of all the factors, the risks we need to manage. So things like public safety as well. Yeah, these things need to be thought about early. Dredging is a niche market, so again, encouraging a competitive process as part of the appointment of someone to carry out the works. I think that'll be important, and then potentially coinciding the works with port. That's been done in the past to save money for council. So I think really having that early contractor involvement is important, and then we would move into consenting, providing the planner all the information they need to make that consenting process as smooth as possible. So that's the process really.
Councillor Wilson.
Just one question, Chair. The costs, and thank you for the report, the graphs particularly helpful actually, just what's going down there. If the $1 million doesn't get us there, where would any shortfall come from?
So if that eventuates, I guess we can look at where that money can come from, whether it's loan funded.
Right, you could borrow it against
etc. So I think there's options there. I think when you do look at the graph, the work does need to be done. I don't think there's going to be a huge appetite to defer it. So
my comment when I move is get on with it.
Yeah. Look, the key risk really is around consenting. Obviously, what was done 10 years ago, which was basically to pump the dredged material out the river mouth into the ocean, we don't feel that that's probably going to get a consent this time around, and that's where the risk is, the cost of getting the consent and information. Previously, it was a pretty light touch cost, about $80,000. It's very likely to cost more. We know the revetment down at Clifton, they spent over $400,000 on consenting processes down there. So that's the area really of risk, and we're really just at the front end of engaging the specialist resources to help us go through that process.
Councillor Bailey, Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 7 talk about the sediment in the lower reaches believed to be primarily from the Narrow River water backing up the Clive River during floods. That's a counterintuitive one to me. It's a new one on me. I assume there's some sort of report or something that are you at some stage, Chris? Can you send me a copy of that?
Yeah, we can fish that out.
Absolutely. I'd like to reach a better understanding of that issue.
Yeah,
Councillor Graham.
So I do have a question, but I've just got a few things before I get to it. So it just appears to me that we did this. We created this problem many years ago, and it was when Peter and I were kids here, and I remember the dredge. I remember it happening and thinking, what a marvellous thing that we can create a new river. But that's the way a kid would think, and it's certainly the way the brains of the people who were doing it at the time thought, and had kids' brains, because they didn't think about the consequences. They just thought about their farms and how they need to take water off the Heretaunga Plains and take it off their hinterlands as well. So we definitely created this problem, and these numbers are quite staggering, really. And there is a counter, of course. My wife's family, in ancient times, 150 years ago, used to live in Clive, and of course, it used to get flooded all the time. So that's the counter to what I'm about to ask. But can we take water from the Narrowrora where it gets close and stick it back into where it was supposed to go, where God put it for thousands of years? And can we do that? I mean, can we correct it? Because we're just going to go chasing our tails for the next 100 years. It's just going to fill up with silt again and continually fill up with silt. We do need to start looking at, can we fundamentally correct the damage that we did in the mid-60s?
So whether it's that solution or any other, is there any notion that you could augment the flow enough to wash this out.
Yeah, so Chair, that has been looked at previously. The assessment was that a floodgate type arrangement would not be sufficient to effectively remove all of that sediment. It potentially has positive impacts on water quality by, because we do have the weed and it would remove some sediment. So it has been looked at previously. The assessment then was that it wouldn't work, but like anything, we can relook at things. Technology's changed. Our ability to do the analysis has changed. Any solution like that would most likely be in the multi-million dollars to build the infrastructure, because when the Narrara is in flood, it's a big river. Whatever the structure is has to be able to work with those high volumes. But if it's the desire of this council to relook at it and look at those options, then that's something we can put on our forward program and then prioritise accordingly. So it's really in your hands.
So where would you put the floodgate? I mean, would you put it to the new... If you change the course of the river back, would you put the floodgate so when a big flood you could just open it up and send down that drain?
Look, I don't think we can solve it right now. There's probably a fair amount of analysis that needs to be done.
Can you look at it? Because otherwise it's just going to continue. Would you be dredging? And the community aren't going to stand for that river looking like it is. It'll be dredging every second year. Because the silt's coming up. So you're going to put $1 million every second year. Everyone's complaining. It was a huge embarrassment to James and I at Waitangi Day, because there we were standing with our treaty partners and the rest of the community looking at the Karamu, which was probably as bad as it's ever been.
I'd agree. It currently doesn't look very good at all. The expenditure at the moment is about $1 million every 10 years, and as I say, we're happy to relook at that issue, and we just have to resource it on our forward work program.
Could I suggest, I've been part of the conversation which went through this before to go and have some discussion, so I'm aware of what you've said. But the point that Rex makes is that this is going to be an ongoing issue. Yeah. I'm also aware that if we then suddenly forward this issue here and put a lot of work and effort into it, other things are going to go off the table.
Right.
So could I ask that you come back to this committee with a brief paper just setting out what it is that you envisage the work would be done, and what the knock-on effect is with others, other events. Well, so we can then have a discussion, a considered discussion before we make a decision about, yes, we'd like you to do the work or not.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to understand what work it displaces and our capacity to do that. So yeah, we'll bring that forward.
Yeah, so Bevan.
So just carrying on that conversation, so looking at this table here, it was envisaged that the dredging would be done every 12 years. The cycle now is going to be 9. It's going to be done this year. And my guess is that it'll be 8 years or 7 years or something the next time around. So if we're going to be spending $1 million plus every 7 or 8 years, that's the baseline comparison, isn't it? Yeah. Just a couple of technical questions. You make a comment in 18 about doing the dredging to align with the port's dredging operations. The dredge used at the port can't get into shallower water than 3.8 metres or something. So I'm not sure what the relevance of that.
All this is highlighting that in the past there has been a cooperation between dredging activities. Yeah. Of course, if the port's doing major capital dredging with very large machinery, that won't be able to enter. But the point is we need to have those discussions to save on mobilisation costs. But if it's technically not feasible, then we have to basically front up those mobilisation costs ourselves. So that's something that we'll work through. With Napier also does dredging of the inner harbour, so understanding their work program, understanding the port's work program, understanding the machinery that's going to be used, and whether it's possible to piggyback any of those contracts together.
Right.
If it's not possible,
But bottom line is you must have a dredge that can go shallower than 3.8 metres because it wouldn't get into that.
That's right.
Yeah. So one of the complaints from the coastal hazards work is that the dredging operations from the port can't be put close enough to the shore.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you is that there's a dredge that potentially could put it closer to the shore.
Yeah. So we need to work through all those options. So some of the options might be land-based disposal of that dredge material. It is high in nutrients, and we really have to go through that consenting process to understand what can and can't be done with dredging.
That was going to be my next question, disposing of the material, because that's obviously going to be an issue, and we've tended in the past to look at the sea as our dumping ground, and that's what we're planning to do again. And
No, not necessarily.
and that's exactly what I want to hear. So I don't know how far offshore we used to dump the dredging when we've done it the 2 previous times, but I'm presuming that some analysis of the material that's there is being done, and there might be the possibility, for instance, of turning it into compost or in some other way being able to use it for something useful rather than just dumping it.
Yeah. So we need that's all the options we'll be looking at. So land-based on the land close to the area would be a good option.
Yeah.
As soon as we start having to move it to other locations, costs get quite significant.
And just at the back of Armatota, there's a composting business there. So that seems to me to be a possibility.
So to get it there, we have to dewater the material and then truck it, which is actually quite a significant undertaking. But we'll go through all those options.
You couldn't pump it?
Well, again, the ECI, the early contractor model, is asking those sorts of questions of what's actually available.
So I'm really interested in you coming back to us with when you've finally done your analysis with what you're going to propose to do.
So I'd say probably about 6 months down the track, we'd be in a position to provide some insight as to what direction things are heading.
And I'd agree with that, Chris, and I think the important thing to emphasise is we're looking at options, Councillor Bevan. We're not just going to copy what's been done in the past. There's lessons to be learned from what's been done in the past, but, you know, best practice, things are moving forward.
Absolutely.
So we need to actually be moving and changing ourselves. So yeah, I'm just echoing Chris there, really.
So just, I'm clear because there have been requests here for some different kinds of analysis. One is analysis related to proceeding with the dredging. The other is alternatives to dredging. We're not in this discussion proposing to not do the dredging in lieu of some other solution, at least this time around. Is that a correct reading of the...
Yeah.
We are going to do this dredging probably in 2020, if I'm reading this correctly.
Yes, that's the most likely scenario, yep.
And so you're doing work to figure out what to do with the material and so forth, but this additional request to revisit other options is a second, is not to displace that. Right, okay. Everybody understand that? Okay. Yep. Would someone like to move accepting report? Councillor Wilson, second. Councillor Bailey. Any other discussion?
Only as I said before, get on with it. I think, you know, history is there that we need to tidy things up. So we've got a fund to do it. Find the most practicable way to get on with it, and let's get it done.
Okay. The seconder was. Do you have any further comment? No. Any other comments? None. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Can we fit one more?
Yep.
Let's move on then. Keep it rolling here.
Stay here, Dave.
Maintaining waterways.
Okay, sure.
So we're on to the further information on the responsibilities of different organisations on maintaining waterways. So you recall Gary presented this paper I think in November or December of last year to this forum, and then during the presentation to the Corporate and Strategic Council meeting in December, Additional information was requested about the proactive measures to prevent obstructions and sedimentation of watercourses. So we've added some material. So the first part of the paper really summarises that everyone who has river frontage has an obligation to maintain rivers and trash and other material in the rivers, so I won't recap on all that. Really, what do we do that's proactive to maintain the rivers, remove logs and other material, and also minimise erosion is really outlined there. It really is the basis of our works program, so we spend about 4.2 million across our various schemes every year, and most of that is preventative maintenance. So we do a lot of removal of trees and planting of trees. It's about 350,000 per year on that activity. We've spent 91,000, I think, in the Wastewater River this year removing trees that potentially add to a flood risk. The works program is there's a lot of effort that goes in through activities such as reviewing last year's maintenance program on the ground to check that it actually was executed appropriately. And things that occur there is with plantings, often plantings can be washed away during floods or the plantings don't take, so there is a bit of rework with some of that planting work. We do 3 yearly detailed condition assessments of the rivers. We do post-flood inspections. We survey transects of the rivers on a 3 yearly basis, and of course take in reports from the public about issues. So really, I don't want to go through all the detail there, but we do spend a lot of money in our managed schemes, and we also spend smaller amounts of money in those unmanaged schemes. Is the bottom line. We also have unplanned maintenance examples, or the non-recurrent maintenance, are examples. We're currently looking at the Waipara River upstream of State Highway 50 to stabilise that area of the river. It's looking like that's $1 million plus solution, so we still have to do that planning work and then look at how we can fund some of those solutions. And things like the Makaratu River is actually degrading. The bed is falling, and that leads to erosion as the riverbed widens. So we're looking at sorts of works we can do to prevent erosion in those examples. So just tried to provide an overview, and happy to answer any questions about our particular programs.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Chris. In paragraphs 5, 6 and 7, you talk about you can issue notices to landowners to undertake certain things. Yep. And at the same, and as well as that, also that any ratepayer can give a written notice to us saying that we need to order a specified owner or occupier to remove all weeds and so on. Do we get a report back at any stage, sort of giving us an indication of how many of those requests or orders are made every year? We don't make those orders, so we have the ability to make them, but my understanding is historically we haven't made a lot of those. Talking to some colleagues around New Zealand, there are other areas that regularly use that provision. Okay, so that's an interesting thing to hear. And so the other one is, do you know if any ratepayers have given notice to us that we have to ask someone to clean something up? It's generally through a request rather than a formal notice. So really, I'd say for us, that process isn't set up or working as per the legislation. Okay. It's an area we could probably tidy up a bit on, and really a request from the public is really is really an order. Yep. Okay, so just one final question on that line. When the Iris system comes on stream, we would be able to get reports out on how many of those sort of requests we're getting, or notifications we're getting? So I think, Iris, we're not currently set up to do that function, and my understanding is Iris is more of a compliance and regulatory tool. This is probably more of the how we manage incoming service requests, which is part of a different part of work around our what's the acronym? What's the name? CRM. Customer relations. So it's making sure when we have a request, we act on it within a certain amount of time, and we have that paper trail and reporting capability
rather than ad hoc calls that come through various offices, etc. at the moment.
Okay, so in future we'll be able to ask you for a report every 6 months or 12 months or whatever to say we've had this many requests and we've actions.
So that might be a way into the future.
Yeah.
But that's certainly something we're looking at.
Councillor Babbitt?
So I'm actually much more interested in us having the capacity to use our powers under this Act for prevention rather than just waiting for the odd complaint that we might get from a member of a community. So is it possible for us to use satellite imagery to identify potential trouble spots?
So potentially it is. That all comes with a cost. More likely we'd use a drone, or those aeroplane type drones to fly rivers. We've had presentations from companies who do that just last week. So that's something we'll be talking with the team for our river inspections, how we can best use technology to do that. But it all comes with a cost. It's providing us new information, but it also comes with a cost that we need to understand.
But the cost of getting a flood and the damage it does is huge compared with the cost of preventing it from happening if we can identify it in advance. So there are some significant constraints in my mind in this Act. And the first is that you can only convey an order for something within 3 metres of the waterway. And when you think about the floodplains on our rivers, they go way, way further back than 3 metres where there's potential problems. So would you regard the current wording of this Act as adequate to provide the sorts of protections that the community might need?
Like any acts, it could always be better. I think the focus is probably we aren't actually utilising some of the tools we have. So I'd like to think we look at using the tool when necessary rather than advocating an immediate change of that Act. I think it can be improved, but I think the most pressing issue is that we simply don't use that provision.
We don't use it at all, yeah. So just one other question, and this is in relation to orders that we can do and obstructions that might impede. So you've got a tree that's standing close to a river. The tree's not an obstruction until it falls over. You get a flood, the tree falls over, and then it becomes a problem. Are we able to order the removal of that tree when it's not yet an impediment to stream flow?
So I think a lot of those trees actually provide stabilisation of banks. So, a lot of that material provides benefit. I think really the types of things that we need to act on is when there's clear felling of trees close to the river and those trees are just left there for the next flood to collect. I think they're the sorts of things we should be focusing on. Removing all trees from our waterways is, I think there's more downside to that than any benefit.
Mr. Barker.
I just want to pick up on that point because I think you're right. When I read this paper, I thought this was a paper written by engineers rather than with an environmental lens on it. And I say that because we were recently discussing Clive River and the build-up of weed. And one of the things that causes the build-up of weed in the Clive is the nutriment and the increasing temperature of the water. Because the Clive River had all the trees cut away from it and sits and bakes in the hot day sun. We say, put a hat on for humans, and we strip all the cover away for the rivers. So if we're just going to look at these things from a purely engineering point of view, and cut all the trees back so the floods are okay, we're just going to create other problems. So what I'd be interested in is a report where we look to manage both, actually, that we leave vegetation close and overhanging the rivers and so on where appropriate for shade, and on the other side of the thing, leave space for the floods there. I think we've got to have a holistic approach to this, just to have a complete engineering approach. And the best example of where the engineers have won is when you drive over the bridge between Havelock and Hastings. A beautiful shaped little U there, walkways on either side, and here's the Catamoo stream completely open and exposed to the sun. And everybody thinks it's beautiful. I think it's ugly. No shade, no trees. The rivers are never like that.
Where was the question on that?
But the question was, I wanted to have a look at paper through an environmental lens as well.
So
This is just an engineering lens.
So, Councillor Barker, we're quite happy to bring a future paper in 3 or 6 months about, I guess, our commitment and what we're doing in terms of shading waterways. I guess there's been a lot of trials, etc., and we're keen to see that happen on our drainage network and our rivers, and understand how maintenance can still occur while providing some of those benefits. In the past, that's been the challenge, how we can continue existing maintenance practices with that vegetation in the way. But I think we can find some ways for things to coexist.
Thank you, James. I'm going to throw this question to you because I'm quite disappointed in this paper, and I asked for more information. And I'll take you back with a landowner who had a problem, and he's come looking for solutions, and at the time it was 150 metres stretched and 2 metres high and 15 metres deep of sediment that had been washed into waterways through an act of God. And we've got all of these different programs that we're trying to get up and running to keep sediment out of waterways, and we've got a really good report here from the integrated catchment management team coming up a little bit later. But so what I was wanting to see was an assurance that when we have people who are coming to the council with a problem, that they're not getting these are your legal obligations and 30% and all this, that we've got a team who can rock up and say, look, here we can see you've got a problem, and here are some other ways we can help, and that picks up on what Councillor Barker said quite nicely. I want to see a holistic approach for our team going out to our community, and I don't really like it when people ring and they say, oh, we got this response, we got this, or you need to talk to the district council, or we need to all be working together and getting all the teams holding hands here a bit more. So, James, a challenge for you there.
Well, I certainly agree, and I guess this goes partly to collaboration between Ian's team and Chris's team, and also to the regulatory teams. I think the history of this organisation has been that the business units have operated relatively independently, and one of the things that we're trying to do, which was referred to earlier on with our review of customer service and our customer relations system, is to ensure that every conversation with the landowner is an integrated one where all of the interests of the business can be brought to bear. And at the moment, what we don't have is any system by which an individual landowner's conversations with the council in different parts of the business are recorded and are visible to everyone, and that there is a way in which a catchment advisor can understand what the issues across that property are, whether they're biosecurity, whether they're erosion control, whether they're in the flood management space, or whether there's a regulatory issue that's been going on. So all of those things historically have been dealt with independently, and it would be common for a landowner to see multiple individuals from the regional council with different specialty. So we're trying to bring that all together at the moment, but we need an underpinning system so that the organisation can talk to each other. But obviously the low-hanging fruit here is more internal dialogue of people, and down in the Central Hawke's Bay office is a good example of that, where we've recently, following the mail out of the notices that I know was an issue of concern to you in relation to the DIN exceeding catchments, reinforced for the teams internally the need for there to be strong internal collaboration over those landowner engagements. So the point you raise is valid, and it's a journey we're on.
That's great, thank you, because we've got Dean here, I see. Because, James, I would like to think that while we are putting all this money into keeping tons of sediment out of the region's waterways to, impact biodiversity, positively impact biodiversity, things like that we, as you take just a scan over a lot of these papers, that we don't want to be seeing sediment, even discussions of sediment from the Clive being dumped out to sea. I think we're beyond that, whether consent allows it or not. I think things are moving on, and we should be taking a leadership role in that space.
Look, I totally agree with you, and I guess the journey we're on with the community is these things are going to cost more. These solutions, the way things are done historically was an awful lot of number 8 wire and things done at least cost by this organisation. In fact, there was a deep philosophy of doing things as cheaply as possible, and some of the corners that were cut from an environmental point of view have effectively been the subsidy. So the conversation with the community is you're going to pay more rates, and particularly targeted rates around schemes, etc., for these schemes to be run in a way that is more sensitive to the environment.
I'll move to receive the report.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Bevan seconds. Mr. Comment?
Yes, I do. I just want to endorse the points made in Councillor Barker's question, which was an outstanding question. What we have here is an engineering challenge which often comes in conflict with our environmental imperatives. And it manifests itself on my own property, so I live this. And the 3 metres is that we've allocated. I would find it quite extraordinary for any council to come to any private property owner who has a small stream and tell them to remove the rubbish and trash which has come downstream and probably from a municipal, as in my instance, it comes from municipal. So that would be quite extraordinary. I didn't realise we had that right, and it's quite draconian right, because whatever's happening is everyone's a problem. But we do have these engineering challenges of taking water off, and it's the same as the last one issue that we had, taking water off and making sure that it flows well, and individual private landowners have a responsibility in that act. But in my instance, and in other people's instance probably, it is the northerly factor. So the stream, unless I plant high trees, which I have done, at least 5 metres away, is always going to be open to the sun for the whole day. And in the winter, in the summer, it would be very warm, and that warm water goes into the Karamu. And if you look at there's the Awahau, and if you look at that stream, most of it is open, and warm water goes into the Karamu from most of that stream. It's very little riparian planting at all. So somehow you guys have got to work out how we bring these two things together. And it's a big challenge. And perhaps it's high trees, I don't know. But in my case, I'm planting high trees a long way away. But, we've got to encourage our landowners. That's going to be very difficult, because take 3 metres off, you're into his orchard. You take 5 metres off. So it's a big challenge. And I look forward to some thoughts of how we solve it.
Second.
I second. Just a couple of comments. I probably have a slightly different view from Councillor Graham on this. I'm surprised that we haven't used the powers that we've got to prevent more obstruction, and I'd like to see us do that.
You're right.
And the solution is not tall trees near the river. The solution is smaller plantings near the river, because they will provide the shade, and they won't cause obstructions that will cause flooding over time. So there's quite easy solutions to this, and we should be exercising what powers we have to try and find those solutions.
Any other comments? Bailey?
Thank you, Chair. And just to follow up from what Councillor Bevan had to say there, I too was disappointed to hear that we hadn't made use of this legislation. And also, I think just to notice that there's also a responsibility from the community, as they describe it, a ratepayer, that if they see anything that they think is untoward, to get hold of us, so that we are obliged to take some sort of action, whatever that might be. So just a shout out to the community there to put a bit of responsibility back on yourselves about letting us know what's going on out there, because you guys these are people who are walking up and down our rivers all the time. So yeah, thank you.
Other comments? Put the question and receive the report.
I want right reply.
Oh, okay.
Because Councillor Bevan needs to get his facts right. He's talking through his wherever, you are not allowed to plant anything within 3 metres. Nothing. And if you do, the big bulldozer comes along and squashes them all, which it did ours. So you need to get your facts right and understand the challenges that landowners have with small streams going through their property. It is very draconian. You can't plant anything. It has to be bare.
I think in our presentation on integrated catchment management, where we're talking about spending 30 million plus on tree planting along waterways, as I understand it. Maybe we'll get some answers after lunch or just before lunch on this.
Might be 30 metres back.
We're going to have a little break here if we can have a vote on accepting this report.
Need to move.
Aye.
Moved and seconded.
Yeah, I voted in favour of it.
So do I.
Can we take a 10-minute break, please?
Now, Rex, I want you to have a look
It
at
is
this.
forbidden.
Oh, so you're telling me this is illegal?
That's probably